I'm Judith Shapiro, and I'm here in my role as a board member of Scholars at Risk, together with my colleague Rob Quinn, our executive director, and it is a pleasure to be here. I should say that I don't know that much about the part of the world that we're going to be hearing about in this conference, although my connection is by being on the board of Friends of the European Humanities University, which is in exile from Belarus. It was in Minsk to Vilnius. As it happens, all of my grandparents are from Belarus, and the political situation has not improved that much since the Cossacks were chasing my grandparents around, and therefore the university was not exactly flourishing in Minsk and had to move to Vilnius. Now, to tell you a little bit about Scholars at Risk, I should also say it's very nice to be here at the Harriman Institute, which, to be somewhat nationalistic, I should note, is being headed at the moment by a distinguished member of the Barnard faculty, Alex Cooley. Maybe you'll get to see him at some point. Now, Scholars at Risk is a network of over 450 higher education institutions and thousands of higher education professionals in over 35 countries. We're best known for SAR's work protecting individual scholars, that is, arranging them to have positions in institutions in the United States and elsewhere where they can be safe and pursue their work. We currently arrange about 120 such positions every year, and we provide another 500 with various services like referrals to lawyers, career advisors, and networking, and others. We have a current caseload, however, of over 600 scholars, I believe, who are seeking help. And so we're grateful to every institution, including Columbia, that has been able to offer positions over the years. Now, while this help to individual scholars is essential and core, it's not enough at a time when entire university systems seem to be under attack in so many places. I mentioned the European Humanities University. We've also been reading a great deal about Central European University in Budapest, and we're not sure exactly where that stands today, but that has gotten a great deal of attention. And actually, the former provost of Columbia University, Jonathan Cole, is a very active member of that board and has been quite involved in these activities in recent days. Also, I believe the European University in St. Petersburg. We also work on behalf of imprisoned scholars in countries like Egypt. Things are not so good in Turkey, as we well know. So there's a whole lot to do in terms of getting out the word about that, to try to educate the higher education sector itself, but also work with government people and the public more generally. Also, we like to have active student groups affiliated with Scholars at Risk, and that's something else we do. Now, this panel and its theme, and this is very much this kind of gathering, a part of the work we benefit from and seek to help, is in defense of democracy, the role of higher education in post-communist states, which is especially important and timely right now. Democracy itself seems to be under pressure, in some places not so far from home, and we really look forward to being able to learn more from one another about what is going on in the part of the world we'll be dealing with today. It'll be interesting to think about, and I don't know whether I don't think, this is more a question than an answer, is once there was a Cold War, and now is the war between nationalistic authoritarianism on the one hand and seeking to preserve an internationalizing, liberal, democratic, cosmopolitan view of the world. So we want to learn from you, and we who are our panelists, and we also want to know what we can do to help in your ongoing activities. So with that, I will turn matters over to our Executive Director, Rob Quinn. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. very much. And thank you all for attending. I know it's late in the semester and it's late in the day. Today, this panel is really the public portion. We have a private workshop tomorrow. We'll have more time to go in depth. But we had the opportunity of our panelists and some other experts joining us for that workshop, and we just really wanted to have a chance to have a public conversation. So we didn't give out bios, so if you'll permit me, I will introduce our speakers and give a little bit on their background so you know where they're from. And if our speakers will permit me, I'll truncate slightly so we don't read for too long, okay? But as Judith said, I'm Rob Quinn. I'm the Executive Director of Scholars at Risk. To my right is Dmitry Dubrovskiy, whose research is in the area of human rights and civil society in the USSR and Russia, including academic freedom, hate speech and hate crimes. And before joining SIPA as a scholar, Rescue Fund scholar here at the Harriman Institute, he headed the program of human rights at Smolny College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at St. Petersburg State University, a joint project with Bart College. And he also worked as a senior research fellow at the Russian Museum of Ethnography. Next to Dmitry is Umida Ganieva, a former lecturer at State University of World Languages in Uzbekistan, and she's currently a consultant at the Humanitarian-Legal Center in Bukhara. She's participated in a number of projects concerned with human rights in the region, in particular with the American Bar Association, the Friedrich Neumann Stiftung, and others. And she's interested in the issue of legal support for women victims of women trafficking, refugees from conflict zones, and rights to education in Uzbekistan. Next is Liz Shchepetylnykova. Sorry, Liz. Liz has been at least 3 of our workshops, and I have still not quite gotten that. She currently serves as the Education USA Senior Advisor in Ukraine. She's a longstanding civil society activist and expert on education policy in Ukraine, and served as the president of the National Union of Students in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Association of Student Self-Government, where she engaged in the development of the current Higher Education Act of Ukraine. And she holds a master's in international education from GW University. Next, we have Ihar Kuzminich, who's a former associate professor at Rodna State University Law School. And since 1997, he's been involved with public legal education in Belarus and other NIS states. In 1998, he co-founded the Street Law Clinic at the university, and he's been the director for Center of Innovations in Legal Education since 2002. That includes both a live client clinic and a street law clinic. He was forcibly dismissed from his position, along with other colleagues at the university, in 2012, and now works as a lecturer at Warsaw University. And the details of his case are among those that are listed by our monitoring project on our website, and the report of which is in the back if you want to have that reference. And finally, Altay Goyushov, as a former professor of Turkic history at Baku State University. He's one of the leaders of the Republican Alternative, or REAL movement, which promotes liberal democratic concepts and values, and is a frequent commentator on local and international media on issues relating to religion, history, and civil society in Azerbaijan. He's a noted scholar and public intellectual with an active social media presence, and has lectured at the Baku-based Free Thought University, and has held prestigious fellowships and visiting professorships in Europe and in the United States. So we have a marvelously qualified and informed audience, panel, audience as well, I'm sure. But as to the panel, because you're so marvelously qualified, we decided to give you an impossibly short amount of time to share your expertise. So if you could boil that down, each panelist was asked to share 5 minutes of thoughts on our theme, and then we'll have some time for discussion amongst the panel, and then we'll have some time for discussion with everyone. So, Dmitry.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Scholars at Risk, for organizing this together this Harriman Institute, and thank you, Scholars at Risk, for all this work, which seems to me very important in the terms of the current situation in Russia, for example, because I have several particular concern. Of course, we do have a post-communist country. We have a lot of the problem with the transformation of the Soviet academia into the post-Soviet. I would say that we still remain in the certain extent the Soviet academia. And this is in the way that's very difficult to measure this, the Soviet academia is in the democratical way, because in a number of places we still remain I would say the Soviet Union education. That's why sometimes I've met, especially in the different regions of Russia, when I met my colleagues, I simply realized we simply don't have a common language because they are simply living and working in the different circumstances. They're living in the context of the, well, just postponed Soviet Union. That's why, well, this is the particular situation with the Soviet Union, I believe, because we are living in the different regions of Russia, living in different political and social time. And now we have, well, the situation when at least 2 regions, they're living out of time at all. I mean Crimea and Chechnya. So this is the 2 regions which do not cover any legality at all. And I believe the list will speak a little bit about it. So, and in this perspective, I'm very interested to think about how these requirements of the Russian government to organize the global cooperation, to be successful in the international and global marketplace of ideas, met the situation of the real restrictions of the academic rights and freedoms in the country. And this perspective is very interesting to think about 2 current challenges. One challenge is the fact that now a lot of the Russian initiative, both state and private, try to find out the way to legitimize the Russian regime abroad, mostly in the different universities abroad. Well, colleagues of mine, Leza Slavsky, consistently protesting against the Blavatnik School of Governance in Oxford University, where one of the Putin's oligarch invested a lot of money into the Oxford, and now the Putin's minister visiting the Oxford and explaining the English students about the good governance in Russia, which seems to me a little bit irony. And secondly, this is this problem of the current problem is with the students. For a very long time, we prefer even to describe our students, well, I've taught for 10 years in the State University, is sometimes less liberal than us. But now I just realized we were certainly wrong in this evaluation, because after the March 26, we have an absolutely different situation in Russian university where a lot of students protested, and now they are under unprecedented pressure because of their participation in this protest. And I am very much concerned how we could protect not only the lecturers and faculty members, but also the students who are right now under serious threat in Russia. Thank you.
I'll talk about the Uzbekistan and Uzbekistan higher educational system. Okay, the reform in a higher educational system in Uzbekistan has begun in 1997. Some attempts were made and some laws were adopted. The first one was the law about education. And the second important one was about the national educational system, the law about the national educational system. And practically every 5-6 years, we made some attempts to increase and to enhance the effectiveness of the so-called model of development of the national system of higher education. But unfortunately, past years have shown that with the change in form through the introduction of new standards and elements, the essence of higher education remain as in the post-Soviet Union era. It hasn't changed at all. And in practice, experts say there is a need for an operation in the country and for a real transition to international standards, the optimization of training programs. But in a national program of higher education implies the continuity of education. Yes, for sure, we implied it, we adopted, we applied this education. we have two levels of higher education: bachelor and master's degree and doctor's degree. But in practice, we have also the unequipped classroom, and unqualified teacher staff, and also the high tuition fees for education. The average citizen cannot afford for his kids. And so the main problem, I think, are these three. And to sum up, I want to say that the leadership of Uzbekistan certainly realized the importance of the educational program and therefore seeks to step in this direction. Recently, seminars and trainings held in Tashkent in Uzbekistan about the training, the qualified staff, and about the increase the level of education. But however, officially, the Uzbek leadership doesn't recognize the fact that to date, higher education in the country leaves much to be desired. On the contrary, it seeks some progress, but doesn't do anything. Instead of it impedes progress. Uzbek education and it's necessary to address the root causes, to create an effective model of education, to train qualified, competitive personnel. The country must solve deeper problems related to its economical and political development. Only the interests of the state itself, supported by concrete actions, will create a solid base for the development of fundamentally new systems. I'm not sure.
Well, I guess in defense of democracy in the current days Ukraine is almost a literal statement that we live with every single day. Just because the major challenges are obviously for the country and for the higher education community are lying and dealing with the conflicts. We have a very active, I mean, sometimes people call it frozen. I don't think if people get killed, it's frozen. It's active conflicts in eastern part of Ukraine. And we obviously have the situation with the occupation of Crimea. I personally come from the eastern part of the country, so many of the things that I will be talking about are things that have been experienced by my friends, members of my family. And this is not really pretty at all, because the two major challenges, in my opinion, that we currently are seeing in Ukraine are, first of all, ensuring that any person, disregard of where they're regionally located, has access to higher education, because we know from Ukrainian history that higher educated community can make a difference. Students have always been in Ukraine the driver of a change because of our opportunity to learn, understand, and see what kind of a future we want to have for our country. The second challenge, which is the one I would love to hear your input on, is how do we access those in the areas of conflict? How do we get even a zip of information about what is happening there? Because honestly, in all of my work, this has appeared to be the major challenge of those all. Speaking about the access to higher education, I just want to point out that most probably the biggest of the phenomena that we have these days are the internally displaced universities. Ukraine had to move over 17 higher education institutions from the areas of conflict to the different parts of the country. Those include establishment of absolutely new campuses, such as the Donetsk National University in Vinnytsia, the biggest higher education institution from the eastern part of Ukraine. Some of the universities just moved to their campuses on the territories that are still controlled by Ukrainian government. The Crimean situation is obviously very different because there used to be quite a number of institutions of higher education there during the Ukrainian government era, and they have all been merged into the Crimean Federal University, which currently functions under the Russian legislation. Very difficult to communicate how things are going out there, but we do know, unfortunately, about the precedents of shutting down programs and departments of Ukrainian language and literature or Crimean Tatar language and literature. So very ethnically based and driven attacks on the higher education community, focusing on specific topics. In the eastern part of Ukraine, what we're also seeing is obviously the lack of any kind of resources, basically, for quality education provision. We see students moving to the Ukrainian government-controlled territories all the time. The government has established specific programs that are providing tuition-free spots for those students. The same applies for students moving from Crimea. There are a little bit different schemes, but they still allow for students that are moving from those territories to gain access to higher education in the territory of Ukraine, as well as to gain valid educational credentials, because this is one of the major points in the end of the day. How do those people, even if they get higher education on any of the conflict areas, integrate in the society, in the labor market, in the international community? And do they? There we have seen, obviously, several cases of having some Russian universities, such as Southern Federal University of Russia, supporting education provision in the eastern Ukraine on the occupied territories when they've provided their diplomas to students who went to the unrecognized by the Ukrainian government universities. And at this point, we also see that Ukrainian government is trying to establish procedures for students that have had some educational experience on the occupied territories to be able to transfer to Ukrainian universities or to get some kind of credentials in the end of the day. Nevertheless, just to point out, it has been very interesting also to see that WEST, the evaluators organization here in the US, has recognized that gaining valid information for credential evaluation for students that are moving out from the conflict areas has been increasingly more complicated, because even in places where we believe the documents still exist, the leadership of the universities on the occupied territory does not want to provide those documents. And it brings me to the second challenge that I have started my speech with. How do we work with getting access to those people and getting more understanding about what is happening there and how we can help them in their everyday realities? Thank you.
I would like to start from the not ancient times of the universities on the Belarusian lands, but on the modern part of it. And it started in Soviet times, in early 20th years of 20th century, when in Soviet Republic, Belarus, several new universities were created. At that time, Communist Party and Communist ideology controlled universities. They controlled them organizationally and ideologically. Second big period in history of Belarus University was when Soviet Union was crushed and Communist Party lost its influence. At that time, universities got real chance to begin to reconstruct their relations with society and with the state, basing on the academic freedoms and university autonomy. But this period was really very short, and now we are in current sad period of modern history of the university. And to illustrate this period, I could tell you a real case when on the 4th of March 2013, Semyon Shapiro, who was the governor of Grodno region, he was the head of state authorities in Grodno region. He came to the university to meet with university lecturers and professors, presenting new rector of the university, and he told that it was him who fired a doctor Andrei Chernikevich, who worked at the Grodno University. And the reason why he fired him, it was because Andrei Chernikevich published his book not in Belarus, but outside of Belarus, in Poland. I could add only one thing, that officially Chernikevich was fired because of the systematically violation of labor law. What does it mean, systematically violation of labor law? During 1 week, twice, officially, it was registered in some way, I don't know how, that he was late on his lectures, first time 10 minutes and second time 5 minutes. That's it. That's all what you need to know about academic freedoms in Belarus in current situation. And one more thing about this sad period. This current period is different because it's not a communist party or some ideology which tries to control university and life inside of the university. It's state which tries to control not only the life inside of the university and decisions which are making by the professors, but it's state which start to control the life of the lecturers and the life of students outside of their universities. When they states start to control social life, they work in private blogs. They're publishing when they publish their books by themselves, when they make their own presentations. This is the difference of the sad period. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, let me say it seems that the situation is very similar in our countries, and another thing is that the situation is different than what was happening in the country in 1990s. Now I'll read my statement. First of all, I would like to thank organizers for paying attention to this very urgent issue and for inviting me to participate in this important event and discussion. There is no doubt that academic freedoms in Azerbaijan are deteriorating. I guess that situation is more or less similar in majority of post-Soviet countries. Moreover, as a historian, I can attest that methods employed by the government is reminiscent of what Soviets did in 1920s and 1930s to fight academic freedoms and liberties. In addition, the government does not tolerate any sign of academic freedoms elsewhere. I mean, they even fight academic freedoms outside of classrooms of officially recognized higher education institutions. The most prominent case regarding this was the shutting down of Free Thought University, which was established by some young intellectual activists and in a very short period of time became a very popular temple of academic freedoms in Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, eventually it didn't last long and due to the pressure of the government. The guys who actually established the universities, they left the country, and one of them is sitting here, is now a student here at Columbia. Most recently, we are witnessing that tightening control over universities became the important priority for ruling regime. A string of new appointments of rectors showed that the government resorts to heavy-handed rule to suppress academic freedoms. Apart from all of these many problems, as a historian, I am especially overwhelmed with what is going on in teaching and research in humanitarian disciplines, particularly in history. Established and widely accepted principle of academic freedom says that academic freedom gives faculty members substantial latitude in deciding how to teach the courses for which they are responsible. In Azerbaijan, especially in history teaching, this privilege is denied. There is a government-supported version of history, and all teachers should follow its discourse. Its critical challenge is not tolerated and can cost one workplace, as it happened in my case. This history is based in rejection of empathy and inclusiveness. It antagonizes local ethnic religious identities against civil liberties, which are actually portrayed as tools in the hand of Western imperialism. So the education, instead of cultivating a world citizenship based on universal values, is actually trying to shape hostile to the rest of the world individuals. Ironically, it happens with a government which tries to sell itself as an example of tolerance and multiculturalism. So what can be done in this situation? It's obvious that this kind of approach to academic freedom stems from the authoritarian nature of regimes which are afraid any and wary of critical thinking and freedoms in general. How, at least in the case of Azerbaijan, regime really cares about its image, and it can be used as a chance to try to pressure it to change at least some of its policies. For instance, it's not secret that in Azerbaijan, rampant corruption and unofficial payments for grades have been the case in universities for a long period of time. But recently, due to both domestic and foreign public criticism, the government is trying to somehow to deal with the issue. Of course, widespread corruption is still there, and I don't know whether it's going to be a consistent policy or not, but there is no doubt that the publicity given to this problem seriously concern the government. I think that sensitivity can be used in case of academic freedoms as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Altay. And I thank all of our panelists for doing a remarkable job keeping it on time. I think I've learned a lesson for the future is if I promise 30 minutes the next day, we can do 5 minutes today. So let me start with what I hope is something that will open us up, and then we're a small group, so we should just have a conversation. But as Judith said in the beginning, one of the things we're thinking about or worried about is, are we seeing a reemergence, at least of an intellectual Cold War, of ideologies of authoritarian nationalism on one side and inclusiveness, as Altay was saying, globalized, connected on the other. Connecting to that idea, I want to say I heard a lot of regional similarity, and it's very convenient for us when we organize panels to put a nice regional title on the panel, right? But that doesn't necessarily create the helpful way in. And I also heard a lot of local dimensions. So maybe I would just ask generally for anyone on the panel, do you think there is a regional connection here, or are we really looking at separate locals that require truly local approaches to have any impact?
Yes, sir? Yeah. I think we actually discussed this issue. The important thing is that they are repeating each other. But who starts first? Is this, kind of organized thing, or just they learn from each other? We don't know. But there are many cases when, for example, in one of these countries, some ruler adopts a certain policy, and then after a period of time, it's repeated in another country. It's the case. And the second important issue, we had just discussed it with Dmitry, that, of course, it's all of them are post-Soviet states, but they are different. I mean, in the case of Russia, I think this, public criticism will not work. But in the case of Azerbaijan, it can work because, Azerbaijan really cares. I mean, Azerbaijan rulers really care about, public image. One of the reasons why they care about it, they do not want to be fully dependent on Russia. So they try to maintain their so-called, independence. And so I think, but as I said in the statement, I mean, when I read, for example, archives of 1920s, 30s, many things which is done, which are done now in Azerbaijan, it's very similar with what was going on in 1920s, how they got rid of academic freedoms, which existed at least in the universities of Tsarist empire. So it's very similar. It's very similar.
Well, first of all, I'm not quite sure I can compare the current time with the Cold War, because the Politburo always disregard of my attitudes. They always try to bind their personal attitudes to the West, with the most of the Russian people, Soviet people. But now I believe it's rather interesting situation. The Russian elites try to be the outside of this Cold War. They propose the Cold War as the model of behavior for the most of the population, but they prefer to send their children to have an education in Columbia University, for example, and the daughter of the Minister Lavrov completed her education here, or in the Yale, in the other places. So that is simply different, and this is the weakness I think we should use. Because they really care not about the most of the population, of course. They really care about their personal reputation. That's why they're using their international community, international universities to wash their reputation. I'm a little bit concerned, for example, the fact that New York University accepted the Boris Jordan money to create the Jordan Center for the Advanced Russian Studies, because Boris Jordan was personally contributed into the crash of the last independent TV station in Russia, I mean NTV. And that is how and when we should start to think the way how, not what's going on with academic rights and freedoms in Russia and other places, what's going on with academic rights and freedoms in this country. Because they could be very, very much spoiled and corrupted by this money which came from Orient, I would say.
I will just jump in to add a little bit of variety to your very interesting conversation here, because I think on the larger scale, Ukraine does look quite different these days compared to other countries in the region, for many reasons, including the strong grassroots movements, the strong stakeholders' engagement, and various issues related to higher education. And as we've also discussed before, including the fact that we've been able to push through the higher education reform at the end of the day. It took us quite a while, but these days, the big monster in the face of the Ministry of Education we used to be fighting for quite a number of days is gone. What is in place, though, is that little tsars, if you want to call them, the rectors of universities that still want to live by the old rules, want to continue doing things the way they used to do them. And that's where we come in, being very similar to other countries in the regions, because from lots of years that I've been engaged with, for example, the Belarus student movement, I can say, well, if you're a very big student activist doing something that your rector or your faculty member doesn't like, you most probably will be penalized the same way. It doesn't matter where exactly you live in the region, right? You will most probably get a terrible grade on your exam and get expelled. What a surprise there, right? If you're a professor that doesn't agree with the university leadership, they are gonna say you violated the labor code. They're gonna fire you. We had a case a couple of years in Ukraine. A couple of years ago, there was a case, where a professor was fired, technically because of the labor code violations, and it was a rare success where we've been able to prove in the court where that was not the case, actually. But in most, of the situations, they are unfortunately smart enough to really make it look like it's real, which is the everyday, I'm guessing, grassroots level cases that are similar in all the countries in the region.
As to the things which are similar in our countries connecting to the universities and higher education. You probably know that education is one of the most traditional system, which changes very, very difficult. And all our countries, this higher education was created during Soviet times. And the persons who are leading now, they are still from that old communist times. And they know how to behave and how to live using authoritarian approach. Yes, it's easier for them to live with this. Even I could say the universities which are based on the democratic issues, like European Humanitarian University, which have to go outside of Belarus, and now he is in Vilnius, as you have told. Even in these universities, professors can't manage in proper way. They manage themselves very often in this authoritarian approach. And that is why last several years in YEHU, we have, in European Humanitarian University, we have several big problems with management. And the only reason of these problems is that they can't behave themselves in democratic way. They don't know how.
I want to say, I have mentioned before that we have a law about the national system, and so in 1999, Uzbekistan has changed their state letters just from Cyrillic to Latin letters. And so I think that the main problem which we have now, it's not an unqualified staff or just the unqualified personal staff, teacher staff. It's the main problem in that the government cannot manage the problem of the equivalency. The books, all books we have, all the books we had from the post-Soviet Union era. We have no any books in Latin letters. And so the student want to study, want to research some kind, for example, of medicine or just in law sphere, but they have no source for study. And so the teachers cannot manage with this problem. And the government just say that it's a problem of the teachers, the staff is unqualified, and so the graduated students is also becoming unqualified. But it's not the root problem in that we have no any just sources, and the government should make a source, should make provide universities with the necessary source. And so we also have a corruption problem. Of course, we have it.
If you'll permit me, I've never done this before on a panel, but I'd like to do a quick quiz, because I'm hearing similarities but also differences, and I wonder if we might be able to try to draw those out. So somebody talked about, I think, Liz, you talked about using legislative reform. So on the panel, quick show of hands, do you think there is any opportunity for legislative reform in your country that would be helpful?
No.
1, 2 no's, 1 yes, undecided.
I know. No.
No.
I think the legislation in Azerbaijan is perfect, actually.
So no need.
That is the reason
No need.
why not.
Okay.
Ours isn't so good.
We heard about corruption in the institution, and I know in our work that one of the challenges in our work is also there's layers, right? So there's corruption at the ministry level, there's corruption at the institutional level, there's corruption at the faculty level. I mean, but quick show of hands, is corruption one of the bigger issues in your place?
I could tell you that this is a difference in Belarus. We don't have big scale of corruption, and it's true. Each year, on the beginning of the session, each lecturer have to sign such special paper that he knows that if he will get bucket of I don't know flowers or $10, he will have criminal punishment. And it's reality in Belarus. They put into a prison with they like to do this. The persons who would like to get any money, and usually it's sums like $100 or something like this. But after each such kind of case, for a very long time, everybody discusses this situation. So in Belarus, it's not a case. But the only reason is that the state controlling all inside of the university. And that is why they try to push out any authority which can influence on the university inside.
Terrific.
In the case of Azerbaijan, it's really very interesting issue. Just recently published World Bank report showed that we are actually champions in corruption in the region.
Oh, you got it.
Right? Yeah, we are. But
Makes me feel good.
but in reality, we see some changes. I'll tell you one. We have some newly established universities, which are run, actually rectors are the members of the ruling family. So they do not allow corruption in their universities. They employ only those guys who are educated abroad, Azerbaijanis. They're calling incentives with very, very high salaries, and they're coming back and they work, and the quality of education is very high. But there's again the problem with academic freedoms. I know that my friend. She was a vice rector at the university where I worked. She also, worked in Texas, Austin, and many other places. She was invited to teach Azerbaijani history, and she went. She's a quite open-minded person. She went to teach. But after actually 1 year, she was dismissed because she had to teach the version of history given to her by the government. But she posed this. She said that, you said that it's a new type of university. That's why I came here. I mean, okay, we are not allowing the bribery here. It's not working, but it doesn't mean that you can teach whatever you want. So, but another issue that's very important, I think it's a different case of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan was the only case that, in the Soviets we had the similar admission system to the university, and the most important bribery was happening there. Very high price. I remember, for example, during the Soviet times, to become a student at medical university, you had to pay something like 40,000 rubles. It was a quite big money. And in 1992, we had another government who changed the legislation, adopted a new admission system. They adopted the Turkish system completely. And actually, we got rid of corruption at all on this level. So corruption existed as an official pay for grades within the universities. And it's still there, apart from those universities established by the, now run by the family members, ruling family members.
So I'm scoring that as partially corrupt. Right? Any others on the corruption?
Yeah. I have an example about the corruption, just in one of the universities. And so sometimes from time to time, some just authorities came to check the attendance of students in our universities. It's how they're coming, and so the attendance is very in low level, because some students are working in Russia, they're working with their parents, they're just gastarbeiters, or so-called, and so the teachers just putting the marks, and so they're paying them money for teachers. And these authorities came to check, and there were from the 36 students in the class, there were about 14 or like that, 14 or 15. And what we will do? And then it should be a punishment for the university, some kind of, for the rectors, for teachers, for the classmates. And they said, let's gather money and give to these authorities for making plus for our attendance. I like that.
Wow.
Like
Yeah.
such example.
Okay.
Very briefly, I still remember my famous joke of the current president, but former rector of the St. Petersburg State University. She said once in the interview, the St. Petersburg State University never was and never have been two things: anti-Semitism and corruption. I laughed and so loudly because this is the very St. Petersburg State University, Leningrad University, was very famous about its anti-Semitism and corruption.
Two more, and then we're coming to the audience, so get ready. We heard a fair bit about external state pressure interfering with the autonomy and freedom of the university, right? But we also heard about internal, and in some ways, historical methods of governance that are authoritarian by nature, using the autonomy of the university in perhaps freedom-demeaning ways, right? So the question is, it's a multiple choice. In your country, do you think the bigger problem is external from the university putting pressure into the university, or is it actually within the university, the hierarchy of the university using the authority that it has against the space of the university?
In the case of Belarus, it's for sure outside of the university. We feel this pressure even at the same case which I mentioned. At the same day, this governor told that he got each day special papers from KGB about the lecturers. He told it officially, openly. So I think that pressure from outside of the university in Belarus is a bigger issue than pressure inside. Inside, almost all is dead.
Okay. Inside or outside?
This is so much more complicated for us.
All multiple choices truly more complicated.
In most of the cases, we're seeing that because Ukrainian universities currently, after the Higher Education Act 2014, became so autonomous, the inside situation and capacities within the different stakeholders inside of the university are so much more important in terms of identifying how the situation is going to develop, because there are schools where rectors and their administrative ladder is just so authoritarian and so strong that neither the students nor the faculty can really get and influence it in any way. So that's where the most critical cases are usually happening. But then there are also places where the things are not really that straightforward. And here's where we are oftenly seeing a little bit of external engagement, let's say. For example, in Ukraine, there is a very big anti-plagiarism and for academic integrity movement these days. One of the victims of this movement turned out to be the wife of the vice prime minister responsible for humanitarian issues, including education, because apparently she almost fully plagiarized her doctoral dissertation. That's a bit of an issue, right? Right there. And guess what happened? Well, the truly ethical faculty members that were analyzing her dissertation put forward a claim to the Ministry of Education saying that this is not appropriate, her doctoral degree should be waived, right? Well, the minister comes from the same party as the deputy prime minister, who happens to be the husband of this woman. So in the end of the day, the woman gets to keep her dissertation. And the faculty member who was the lead expert on evaluating it got fired. I'll just leave it there, I'm sorry.
Well, that's interesting. I'm just thinking that this is a kind of was a kind of agreement within the post-Soviet academia to escape the freedom voluntarily, because of different reasons. First of all, because of crisis, because of the serious issue of the shrinks of the workspace and the different opportunities to work outside of the university or the institutes they are working. And that's why, for example, in my university, St. Petersburg State University, I suspect there's the current regime, which is very close to the kind of very similar to the Putin's regime, just within the university. It's very common to duplicate or to make replicate the political regime in the country into the university, which is very logical. But it seems to me that exactly what's happened within the university when the substantial part of faculty members, they decided not to participate in any democratical procedure, just to be out of the so-called politics, just to concentrate on the so-called pure science and so on. So that's why I truly believe this is a kind of agreement between the foreign external pressure and internal agreement to be pressed, I would say.
All right, last but not least. Oh, go ahead.
I actually agree with Dmitry that, no doubt it originates from the outside. It's a government pressure on the universities. But the problem is that the faculty, they are really, afraid of any changes. They're really afraid, because I think I'm talking about my university. Majority of the faculty above 50 years old, they do not use emails, they do not use computers, and they are afraid of these things, And they think that democracy, I'll tell you a case, when I was, fired and my rector gave a, interview on TV, it was a very interesting case, and it's how they understand things, I said that, he went to America, he learned lots of democracies there, came back and started demanding things. And so I think I didn't demand anything, regarding, democracy or things like that. It was just, about the workplace and things like that. But the problem is the faculty are really afraid. When they see young guys, it's a danger. It's a danger. Any young guy who educated abroad came back, he's coming here with his own rules. And so I think it's a kind of an agreement between the government and the faculty that they are happy with the situation.
Okay.
In Uzbekistan, also similar situation like in Azerbaijan, because the students, even in their holiday, cannot participate in some trainings or seminars which is held in abroad. Just they scare the university, the outside the government scare of the students who are going in abroad and who are just hearing some new things. And they are really scared of the changing their regime.
But let's just make sure we're on the same page on that, because I'm hearing you said they're happy with it. You're saying they're scared, and you're saying they withdrew, right? But in all cases, it's afraid, right?
Afraid.
Even the ones who you're saying are happy with it, they're not really happy with it. They're just afraid of change,
They
right?
are happy, but they are afraid of the government, no doubt. But at the same time, they do not want to change because they think that any change, it's going to concern their, let me say, security, safety. They're going to fire because they're going to hire new guys. We are not, adjusted to these new changes which is happening around. So I think it's a kind of, of course, it originates from the government, but it has kind of finds support among the faculty itself.
Well, I'm a little bit afraid that's the expectation of the Soviet academia, late Soviet academia, was a little bit unfair. So the idea was that when they then they will open the doors, they will be embraced as equal partners with the international community. But in reality, they was incompatible in the terms of the real level, especially in humanities and social science. That is the very big issue. And that's why for the substantial amount of the faculty, and at least in my university, they understood quite well. They are competitive in a very restricted manner. That's why the current isolation of their, for example, Russian academia could be very easily to explain. They simply don't agree to compete. They are not ready to. That's why that's much more easier to organize the self-isolation and to organize the competition within. So, well, here we could at least win. But in the international market, we cannot win. That's why. So this is the problem of the international competition here.
Terrific, thank you. So I mean, that helps to clarify for me. So there's a difference between the fear of the political consequences and the fear of the disruption of competitiveness in an open market and so forth.
May
Yeah.
I add one sentence? You know, majority of, I mean, it's era of social networks, you know. You can see many of these teachers are actually ridiculed by their students on Facebook pages. And they're not happy. Of course, they are not happy with it. But the reason why they are ridiculed, because the new generation, with their access to, you know, this internet, or they know more languages than their teachers. So it's really, I mean, it builds a pressure on the faculty that, you know, this is a hostile. This is not, you know, friendly towards us or something, you know. This is what's happening, actually.
Yeah. And I, you know, I would say in our work, in the background of our work, we also have to acknowledge that we're working in a sector that's going under historic revolutionary transformation. Even if nobody was trying to do harm to faculty, there is a lot of transition going on, right? So we see that. Okay, last lightning question. Trying to leave it on potentially something a little more positive, but we'll see. We heard the issue of legitimacy, of reputation, of how the Russian government cares enough to send people to the UK to argue that these things are good and so forth. And we heard in Azerbaijan definitely the government's reputation matters. In each of your countries, is there a reputation point that we should direct advocacy towards? Is there a leverage place to put the lever? And if so, what is it? And then I'm coming to the room. Okay.
Very, very briefly, I believe that's the due diligence simply needed in any case of the collaboration and the educational and research field in between the countries. So I mean, it's very important for the academics, and it's really chilling effect if we are organizing the collaboration with the universities who are openly violated the academic rights and freedoms at home, and then they are going abroad and they are organizing the international collaboration with international community. So that's why I believe it's important. Yeah.
As for Belarus, there is, as I think, it's only one idea why they care about the international, what international community thinks about higher education in Belarus. It's in Belarus, state think about the universities and higher education as about the factories, which have to bring money. And so they need foreign students, which have to come to study, to pay money, and go home. That's the main idea of this. That is why Belarus in 2015 began Bolognian process. Mm-hmm. Till that time, they didn't want to. Several times they started, but then, you know, it's really very, very difficult way of coming to this Bolognian process. Even now, they are doing almost nothing to stay in the Bolognian process. But the only reason is to have good information overbroad about the level of education and about the high education in Belarus. That's
This is very important, you know. They are actually publicizing all of their, let me say, collaborations with, for example, Western universities. If any, for example, visiting researcher coming from United States, from Europe or something, they are using this as to show their credibility, that we have a, you know, professor from, I don't know, from UCLA, Columbia or something. This is very important for them. So I think it is the issue which we can use. And when we can publicize, I mean, single facts about, you know, this violation of academic freedom, when something, you know, outrageous is happening. This is very important because, you know, shame in our society doesn't work, but here it works. I mean, to some extent, and we can use it, you know, to show that, you know, it's not a good thing to collaborate with this kind of universities which actually violate, you know, the academic freedoms, and giving it just publicize this kind of events. I mean, I think it can. I cannot say about Russia, it's a big country. I mean, Azerbaijan case, it's a small country. I mean, it can work. It can work. It can bring some kind of, at least force them to restrain, to avoid publicity. I mean, not to make, you know, lots of noise, and because they can understand that this noise can bring some troubles, but they do not want these troubles. So I think the giving the publicity to this kind of events when it happens, and really happens, and to appeal, I mean, whether it works or not, to appeal to international academic community, just take into account that don't collaborate with this kind of universities, with this kind of higher education institutions, which are really, you know, kind of the situation is really, with academic freedom, is deteriorating or something, or there are single cases which say, you know, kind of attacked academic freedom or something. I think, in my view, it can work, at least in the case of Azerbaijan.
One suggestion. I forgot. We could influence even in Belarus. In Belarus, authorities and universities don't care about professors from different universities. Most of them speak English, and it's not helpful for Belarusian system of education. But what they care about, it's about common programs with foreign universities. And the only reason is amount of money. It doesn't matter the goal, the results. They will try to do their best to achieve results which they will put into the project. Is for sure, because it works like enterprises. It's like everything is, you have to do this, you have to do that, and that is. But this is very important for each university, and each university in state start to think about the university in better way when it have big amount of money from foreign funds or cooperation or something else.
Yeah, I guess there are two levels to this in Ukraine, and I would echo colleagues talking about the pressure on the individual institutions, because as we've discussed before, there was just a couple of months ago a case in Ukraine having a handful of student activists expelled from a university because they've been doing an anti-corruption investigation inside of their university, and they've discovered many companies that had interesting relationship with the rector of the university, getting lots of money from that school. And FYI, this is the top university in Ukraine. Comes into the international rankings, and considering that Ukrainian higher education landscape is becoming more and more competitive, they really care about their international image, and they really care about being internationally recognized. So having these cases publicized on the international level and having this information, even in simple, everyday conversations, brought up to the leadership of the university from the side of the international partners can make a difference. However, there's also, obviously, besides the general Ukrainian landscape, the landscape that I spoke about earlier, the conflict areas, which are much more complicated. And here, I really think it is very important not to forget about our eastern border country and really put more pressure on Russia, because, honestly, in the end of the day, if there is, and there is a gossip, I'm going to put it forward like that some American credential evaluation agencies are going to recognize credentials from Crimean Federal University from now on because it's accredited in Russia. And things like that should not be acceptable in the academic community at all, because anything that increasingly legitimizes what Russian government has done in Crimea or the way it supports activities of the terrorist organizations in the eastern Ukraine is going to directly impact academic freedom, because that university allowed itself to shut down 2 departments based on their ethnically driven research, right? People in the eastern Ukraine suffered from so many different incidents, starting with, 20 Nigerian students being taken to the police directly from a bar just for being international at some point of time in Lugansk, and ending up with the fact that some rectors of internally displaced universities who live in Ukraine these days sometimes go forward and say, I'm not going to say this on the camera because I still have family members that live in the occupied territories, and I don't know if that will lead to terrorists killing them tomorrow. So there's a lot of censorship in that space as well, and this is the part where, it's really not the Ukrainian side of the story that has to be influenced.
And in Uzbekistan, as you know, our president changed and we have new president, and he's making some quick attempts to change the situation. And he showed that he'll be happy to international cooperation with the international universities. And I hope, but in also the sayings, but it's not in fact, but it's really short time that he'll become a president. And I hope that the situation will be changed, and in future, and just will come some international, we will do some cooperation with international universities, and we have some kind of programs, exchange programs, but we have not this for nowadays, but I hope so, but because he showed his interest. He showed his interest. He just applying, adopting new laws, and the time will show what
Terrific.
happens.
Well, again, thank you all. Thank you for indulging the questions. And Jan.
Yes. Thank you. At the theme that we are addressing, the role of higher education in post-communist states, I wonder if you could generalize how do the post-communist states view the role of higher education? And what effect does this have on the disciplines that receive support and those that do not, and on the general culture of the universities?
I'm afraid that, from my understanding, the Russian government considered the higher education as the strange combination of capitalist system and the Soviet mentality. For the one side, it should bring the money. For the other side, to control the population, to distribute the so-called patriotic views through the university. So that's why it's it's really contradicted each other, because to be a global actor, it's very difficult to sit in the one chair. It's not to share this chair with the others. So this is very much contradicted in itself. I mean, these goals. But I'm a little bit afraid this is what's going on right now. Because for the one side, we are always asking to, well, I mean, the members of the faculty members of the different universities to be very successful in the international spheres, to collaborate, to be to publish in the foreign languages, mostly in English, but at the same time, not to intervene, not to touch this sensitive matter, not to discuss that, not discuss here. So this is how they try to control their international global communication in this sphere.
I guess from my experience with many parts of the Soviet Union, one thing I find in common is the way how higher education systems are being and institutions are being just instrumentalized. You know, they're just being used as an instrument, whatever goal the government has in the end of the day, whether it's the early voting of students in Belarus or it's in case of the former government of Ukraine, you know, building up the massive corruption scheme to feed up everybody all the way up to the president. So it's really it's really an instrumental vision versus the values and you know, the kind of overall cultural and systematic approach towards the system.
So they do not see it as a tool for defense of democracy?
So I would say that I believe many in the former Soviet Union countries understand it might be, and it might eventually become a disruption that causes democracy. Which is not necessarily something that many of those countries or their leadership is striving to achieve, because I mean, in case of Ukraine these days, it has certainly become much more popular as an idea in the long term, because everybody in country, putting it simple, acknowledges that we really do need to increase or improve the quality of higher education and the quality of the skills and competencies that people have in country in order to achieve further development. Because in a sense, we've just, you know, kind of reached the peak of what could have been done with the capacity that there is.
As for experience of Belarus, I could tell you that we have such situation exactly because the state understood the role of higher education. And that is why we have such situation as we have. And it was really a long period of time to understood this. During 18 years, I provided lectures to my students openly. I spoke like here about everything. And sometimes, like a joke, colleagues told that, you know, that students are writing about what you are saying and giving to the special services. I told, okay, it doesn't matter, but it was like a joke. But now it's reality. State understood and state work hardly to control not only the university now. They understood that in informational society, very important is a person of lecture, who could be a leader. To whose ideas whose idea student could listen and believe in this idea. So they started to control not only the university by itself, higher education, but the persons who deliver this education, lecturers, professors.
You know, First of all, of course, they understand the importance of education and they care about education, but that's why they send all their children to study abroad in American universities and all of it. I mean, it's very important for them. But they deny the same thing for the society because they understand that the education can become an engine behind the change. And it's the most important thing. That's why they're denying the academic freedoms, because they understand within the education that this, academic freedoms can make them a, passionate force to change. This is very important. But at the same time, they understand that in Azerbaijani case, it's very difficult to resist it now. When you have, the access, social networks to, when people are really energized to learn other languages, to go study. I mean, it's a kind of driving force behind, behind the youth. So that's why they are trying to make changes. As I said, they are establishing new universities, belong to family, but they are adapting a new rules. So far, they denied academic freedoms, but even academic freedoms are, kind of finding the way to these universities, because when you invite, for example, the guy who educated from the Columbia University to come and teach, you cannot say that you are absolutely denied. He still finds the way to somehow deliver some, for example, Adnan was in prison. I just learned that, one of the teachers at the Diplomatic Academy, which one of these, universities, he gave the students the coursework about their imprisonment, why they were arrested and things like that. They are doing it, they're trying to tacitly to hide it, but it's still it is still happening, Yeah, of course, they understand the importance of education as a driving force, but they're trying to to resist. At the same time, it's very difficult to resist, to open it, to make it less dangerous for the regime, but still they are not capable, absolutely denied.
Thank you all the panelists very much. I am Arevigana Piosyan. I am from Armenia. I have two mixed feelings. I am very much excited and I feel like I'm heaven because I figured out, and it's one more time reiterated, that Armenia is not an island of being in such a bad situation when it comes to higher education. But the negative thing is that we seem all the post-Soviet countries seem to have the normative framework, which is absolutely ideal, but we do not have the mechanisms that make the higher education to be a critical, to foster critical thinking and to transform the society towards democratic one. I know that I'm probably not allowed to hijack the session, because the Q&A session, because I have a lot of questions. And it's absolutely amazing how you brought up the issue of teaching history, because it resonates a lot of what's happening in Armenia. The same comes with closing the universities and not recognizing their degrees. It also resonates with what is happening in Armenia. But I have a more, and also the question about corruption. I think that we're all very good at hiding corruption. Now we're calling it integrity. And we're trying to, the problems that are coming with integrity are far more salient, and we really like to tackle it, and first to conceptualize and then tackle those issues. But I have more of a general question, that the issue of trade unions, I've been wondering, what is the role of trade unions? What can be the role of trade unions? So my first question is, do the countries that you're coming from have independent, like genuinely independent trade unions? And the contingency question is, do you believe if our countries would have the genuine independent trade unions, will they make a change in defending the academia? Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify, do you mean academic trade unions or other unions? Any unions?
No. Trade unions for the academia. Yep.
This is a really crucial point. In reality, we have a kind of, in the Soviet legacy, we have a very negative attitudes to such kind of formal trade unions, which is usually organized as kind of entertainment for the members. That's nothing else. And in Russia, we have several now, at least one I know pretty well, University Solidarity, Universitetskая Solidarность right now, which is very actively working, pretty small. And it's interestingly, they describe themselves like working as a trade union in Chicago. Because they're so cruelty, so a lot of the pressure, even physical pressure, to the members of the academic community from the authority of the universities in Russia. Because this is how the people met the real resistance from the authority when they started to really defend the rights of the academic, of the faculty members. So this is, well, among the others problem, this is one of the biggest issues in the falsification of this emulation of the trade unions at Soviet Union, and that still remain. We don't have a real working trade unions in Russia in general. And that's why it is one of the biggest issues to create the independent trade unions for the academics.
I completely agree with Dmitry. I will speak a little bit about trade unions in Belarus as one of the institutions which helps state to control the university. Yes, if we will have independent trade unions, it will help lecturers and students very much. But how to do this now in such situation in which we are, it's impossible. I could tell you again the same case with Dr. Andrei Chernikevich. You know that, maybe you know, under the law, it's a trade union have to decide is it okay to fire Chernikevich in the conditions that he violated of, as they wrote, violated twice systematically labor law. And the decision was not he can't be fired. That was the decision. But after 2 days later, they put all the same persons who voted again, and the majority of these persons, from 11 persons, 8 persons decided that yes, it's necessary. So it's, you see, if the trade union in that situation will stop, I think that it will be very difficult to authorities to show why they have to fire Dr. Andrei Chernikevich. But we have the situation which we have. And of course, you understand that the reason why second time they have to get together to decide, it was something really, something important. They something lost. And something wrong with procedure or something like this. But in reality, is you understand how it works. The same persons, in 2 days, change their minds.
One more comment, and then we have time for one more question.
Just real quick, I have little sympathy for trade unions because of my professional background. We figured early on in the Ukrainian independence history that trade unions for students don't work. They just don't. And in early 90s, in parallel to the trade unions, Ukrainian students just started creating normal student unions as other European countries have. And that worked. We have seen that bringing in a new structure with a fundamentally different values has a chance to survive and has a chance to become so much embedded in the system as it is right now that in the end of the day, I mean, you cannot even there are many things in the Ukrainian higher education system that require a student union support to go through. So I don't think the old, folks are going to change. I'm sorry, I'm really skeptical about coming into the old trade unions that have not really been eager to protect academics and changing them miraculously and them becoming that instrument. However, it is really needed to find a way out, because obviously there is a need, and this is something that we are seeing in Ukraine, is that faculty members are oftenly more vulnerable to any administrative or pressure just because they don't have the capacity to organize. Just because when a faculty member is fired for what he or she did or said, they are so much less likely compared to a student who got expelled to get out, to find an NGO, a human rights protector, a lawyer, to go out to the media and just defend their case publicly.
So briefly here, go ahead and then
Shortly. Just I want to give some understandings about my country. We have no trade unions, and our authority just have a negative attitude to such trade unions, and I hope maybe we will have sometimes, and we have no any experience with the trade unions in Uzbekistan. We are a bit closed somehow, maybe I can say that.
We have officially pro forma trade unions, but it's another branch of the ruling party, so that's the situation.
So we're going to have to make it brief, okay? This will be our closing question, and then we can chat after.
Thank you for the informative panel. I need a little moment to explain my question. So the fact that you all here means that you are brave examples and you're on the good side. So I was wondering, what is this fine line within like a bad side? As an example, I can give this professor from NYU that everybody talks about, or what is it there? Like, do you need to feed your kids? Is it financial, or it's integrity, or it's more like I need funding for my research? So, what makes you to step away from those people in academia who know that they're doing wrong things, but they kept doing it? If you can give your personal examples, maybe. I'm just curious, what is this that drive you there rather than staying on the other side?
I think
Thank
this
you.
is the troublemaker question. Why are you all troublemakers?
Yeah. Well, as a historian, I believe that now is faculty members at academia is nationality. I truly believe in our identity as international. Well, we are a nation, and that's why the other people who believe they are just workers or just doing science or just doing education, this is just for the other side of the story. That's it.
I can say, that how it happened. Actually, imagine I went to Georgetown as a Fulbrighter for 1 year, then spent 3 more years at UCLA, came back, and it's almost it was almost impossible to be the same, It's not just, not to be the same, but you need some, kind of, you don't demand anything, but they feel everything, and where the trouble starts. And I'm not troublemaker. I didn't want to start anything, It just happened. I don't know.
Sorry, that was my word.
I got troubles from administration and from authorities because of fairy tales. Can you imagine such situations that rector, 2 prorectors and dean are sitting in a room and asking me about the questions about my fairy tales. It's reality, you see, and they were not cruel, no, a little bit, but not something special, and they tried in their understanding to help me. They told if I will left my work, they will help me to find a work in a private institution, and everything will be okay. They will take care of me. Can you imagine this? I have 45 years old, and they want to fire me because of the fairy tales? They're joking or something? They want to do me some favor? I can't get from them anything, you see. If they want children fairy tales, just they thought that they are too political. No, it's the case was not even about the fairy tales, a little bit about fairy tales, but the case was that I put these fairy tales and under my name, but not nickname. They told if I will be Bolik Lolik, it will be not a problem. But as I put my name there, it's...
It has to be a responsibility.
Yes, it's have to be. So, let us...
Just to wrap it up, you know, sometimes people have things in their character that make their life challenging. I was born a rational and a proactive person. It always gets me in trouble in my part of the world, because when you say, well, this is not efficient, you can make it easier and better if you fix a couple of things, people get defensive, you know, they start saying, oh my gosh, why do you want me to change my routine? I've been doing it like this for 15 years, what's wrong? That is often an argument for people to stick around and to keep on doing stuff, you know, even if they cross the line of what is right and wrong sometimes. It's just their routine. And I feel like for many Ukrainians, it's an answer to many questions. It's my routine. You want me to change something? That's going to require effort. Most people are probably a little bit lazy at least. So when they get a chance not to put in any effort, they choose that.
Yeah, so we're a little over, so I appreciate the question. Just to wrap up, and it's really just a pause because we're going to continue tonight and tomorrow. I first of all really love the quote, which Altay, you've given me, I think if I got it right, you don't demand anything, but they fear everything. And so I won't say how long I've been doing this now, but we've literally had probably almost over 2,000 scholars come and tell us their stories, and several hundred we've been able to help through our network. And that question is one I've asked for years, right? It's why you? How did you get in this? But I really do think we shouldn't think of those who are not the ones who get in trouble as bad, because the vast majority are just caught up in the same systems. And if we want to change these systems, we need to help them feel safe to move closer to this. And even, frankly, state authority, you know, if they appreciate education enough that they're making sure their children get it elsewhere, there's a little point of connection there that we can work with, you know. So let me end with the point of you saying you're not an island. And I got that again from this panel. And years ago, and in fact, how we've met some of the people on this panel, we had a project to do workshops around different parts of the world. And one of the things we learned was to bring somebody from the other side of the world to each workshop. Because the workshops used to start out the same way. And the first time we did it, everybody would start, you don't understand, it's different in my country. Right? And so what we did was the first whole day of the workshop was people just saying for 15 minutes what happens in their country. And then we salted it with one person from the other side of the world. So we had somebody from Malaysia come to Jordan, And when you heard them say what was going on in Malaysia, it was exactly the same. The dynamics, the manifestations were different and local, but the dynamics were the same. And I'm certain the leaders of today haven't actually spoken to the leaders of the 1920s, but it's the same dynamics, right? So one of the things we hope to achieve in our project is simply by linking up this conversation and saying we are not alone, and how do we, the nice thing about structural dynamics is we should be able to come up with ways to respond to structural dynamics, and that's what we're trying to do. So I really appreciate all of you for listening, for sharing. I thank you all for being on the panel, and I'm really excited for continuing this conversation tomorrow, so thank you.
Thank you.